I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, I'm delighted to welcome back one of my favorite authors. He's a prolific author. His name is Carlo Armenise, and he has written another book that is an absolute page turner. It is called Deceitful Intentions, a revenge mystery. After a tragic car accident that was no accident at all, Raven Redman returns home with a new prosthesis and lost memories, only to uncover dark truths. Join us right now as we explore a gripping tale of recovery, betrayal, and the quest for vengeance. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us once again here on Spotlight. We thank the team at Authors Tranquility Press for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and purchasing his amazing books. The links are below this interview. Carlo, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Great to be here, as always.
My pleasure. Love having you on the show. Our audience loves it too. Let's start out with a big picture. Let's give them an overview of what Deceitful Intentions is all about.
Well, Deceitful Intentions, I started to write Deceitful Intentions some time ago, and I wanted to write a story that involved the process of courage and overcoming adversity. And when I first started to look at it, I wanted the characters to be, I wanted the character to be a young woman who had gone through a traumatic experience. I mean, there's so many people out there that go through traumatic experiences. And for many people, they don't have the ability to come back because it's so traumatic that it's very difficult to, get yourself back in a place where you can really move on. And I wanted this character to go through the process of having a traumatic experience and having the courage to move on. And I wanted it to be under the umbrella of a mystery. It was about a car accident. And in the car accident, Raven's mother was killed and Raven lived. But she lived with a lot of deformity. I mean, she lost one of her legs. She lost her memory. She lost her mother. And the ironic thing was she lost her mother and she didn't even really know who her mother was because she had lost her memory. So the whole purpose of this book was to really talk about friendship because she's got a great friend. And this friend helps her. They were high school friends. And when Raven got in the accident, she goes through recovery in the hospital, and then she wants to know what she's going to do. And so her mother had left her house in her will in the city she grew up in. And so they told her that where she could go back to her mother's house, back to Michigan, where she lived, and she could move into her mother's house. And it was through the process of moving into her mother's house that she became reacquainted with her friend Julia. And Julia was such a good friend. She really was determined that she was going to help Raven get her memory back. And so the story was about how she got her memory back and what she finds out and what she and Julia find out in the course of recovering her memory. And she finds out that the accident that her mother was in wasn't an accident after all. It was murder. And at the end of the day, she, through a series of recollections, what ends up happening in the story, which is what I really liked, was I had her remember things. She didn't have a memory, but there were certain things that happened in her hometown when she was there that forced her to have these recollections. And through the recollections, her and Julia solves the mystery with having these little snippets of recollections. And so it was kind of one of those kinds of stories. We didn't want to divulge it all at once, and you weren't really sure she was going to get her memory back. But when she did, there was enough of it there to help her solve the mystery. And, the whole friendship thing came across big time. I really wanted that to come across, that people really need friendship, and friendship can be very, a prescription for great if you find the right kind of friends, which she did. And it's got some comedy in it, got a few laughs, and it's got some pretty sinister character, the person who ends up being the murderer when it's all said and done.
It's an incredible story. It feels very real. You read about these stories in the paper where it's been a terrible car accident, mom's killed or dad's killed, and then the surviving person in the car loses a leg or something like that. I mean, it's just such an awful thing that you've lost your mother, you've lost a body part, you're dealing with the challenges of a prosthesis for the rest of your life. Even if they appear to walk normally after having a prosthesis on, there's a whole list of challenges that go with such a device. So it rings very, very true and kind of answers our questions of what life is like when somebody goes through a traumatic injury like this.
Well, and the interesting thing for me was about the fact that, when things happen naturally, car accidents, you could argue that it's not natural, but it's something beyond your control. It
Mhm.
happened. Maybe you did something that caused it, maybe you didn't, but the next thing you know, it happened, and so now you've got to recover from it. In this particular case, the car accident was caused. It
Mm.
was a cause. It wasn't her doing. It happened. And yet when she comes to grips with the fact that the car accident was caused, then it just makes it that much more difficult,
Mm.
because then you've got to sit back and say, well, if they hadn't done this, I'd still have my mother.
Yeah.
And that was she had already lost her father to cancer
Wow.
years before. So her mother was really her only salvation in terms of having somebody like that in her life. And her mother was a talented lady. She was an artist, and she was gave a lot of support to
Mm.
Raven. And so that was even more interesting for me as I was writing the stories. I wanted it to be that kind of, when you don't have a choice and something happens, you still have a choice to
Yeah.
get through it and move on. And hopefully you find some people in your life that'll help you do that.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were talking about this accident was caused. I couldn't help but thinking, in some ways, all accidents, somebody's to
Somebody's
blame.
cause.
Going too fast for conditions, alcohol, or whatever it is. So there always is someone to blame. In this case, it was murder. Um, Tell me about the revenge aspect of the story. That's a big part of it too.
Well, as it turns out, what ends up happening, and of course, Raven doesn't know any of this when she goes back, as she starts to get her memory back, she meets a woman who is evidently a good friend of Raven's mother. She was a high school teacher, and this woman was a high school teacher, and so she was friendly with Raven's mother. And she comes to greet Raven when she first goes back. Now, of
Mm.
course, Raven doesn't know that she's involved with it and doesn't remember her as a person, even though she had met her several times as she was growing up. But she doesn't know anything about this woman. And the woman kind of comes into the story when Raven moves back into the house at the beginning and comes over to welcome her into the neighborhood. So that's kind of how that relationship starts. And of course, Raven is delighted that somebody that knew her mother and could give her information about her mother. And of course, the woman wants to know right away, you lived. And she, we were so excited that you lived. Well, of course, she's not excited that she
Yeah.
lived, because the reality is, had she not lived, then none of this would have come out into the open. But she's basically, you we're so excited that you lived. And when Raven starts to get information about the accident, the woman wants to know, do you remember anything about the accident? And of course, Raven has to say, no, I don't remember. And so she even provides Raven with some newspaper accounts of what happened, the woman does. Well, as it turns out in the story, the woman was the killer. She
Mm.
was the one. The woman's husband had an affair with Raven's mother.
Mm.
And so um, that's kind of the rationale and the reasoning behind the revenge, is
Mm.
that but she did it in such an interesting way, because she uses poison muffins.
Mm.
Now, this was something that I wanted to do in the book because I wanted it to be unique.
Mhm.
I mean, people get poisoned all the time,
Mm.
but I wanted it to be sort of a unique situation. And she did it with poisoning in muffins.
Mhm.
And she poisoned Raven's mother with these muffins, which is what caused the car accident. So Raven was on her way back to college. Her mother was driving. And in the meantime, Raven's mother had been given these muffins by this woman. And so she was going through the beginnings of it was in a situation, she was going through the beginnings of being poisoned by the muffins. And in the car on the way to taking Raven back to school, the muffins poison her, and that's what causes the accident that
Right.
she's in. And so at the end of the day, that was kind of unique, is how this, and of course, Raven doesn't know that she really, she was the cause of the accident. So Raven, being very friendly, basically befriends her. And this woman has a son also, that's a policeman. And Raven and he were boyfriend and girlfriend. And so that's another piece of the story that comes out through it. And I wanted it to be a unique story, but I wanted it to be heartfelt. You know,
Mm.
there's certain scenes you put in books where people sort of sit back and say, wow, that's really heartfelt. You know, her relationship with Julia is one of those relationships, Raven, because they share these experiences as Raven gets her memory back of growing up, and also sharing because Julia's mother passed away from cancer. And Raven, of course, loses her mother in the accident and her father. So they've got this, they're simpatico when it comes to their experiences of death. But they share that together. And they become really, really, really close. And the interesting thing is when I wrote the book, I wanted that to come out, and I wasn't really sure that it came out as well as I wanted it to. But people who've read the book all say the same things. That was one of the things they remembered the most about it, was that friendship relationship, which was important to me as a writer.
Absolutely. And I really like the almost like noir ironic twists also that Raven befriends her mother's killer, you know.
Yes.
I think that's such a unique twist, as well as the policeman boyfriend aspect of it as well. It almost reminds me of like one of those 1940s things where they've gotten in so deep, only to realize they've gotten in deep with the enemy, you know?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's exactly right. And that was kind of the way the story kind of flowed for me, was that I wanted all those elements to be there. You know what, when you write, when I write anyway, and I write a story, I have certain expectations about how I want the reader to react.
Mm.
And if I get that reaction, then I'm golden. I feel really good about that. And sometimes you never know whether
Yeah.
you're going to get that reaction, you know. And so I was really pleased with the reactions that I got from the story. And it's in my mind, it's a great story. It's one of those that, you know, it's not horror, but it's horrible
Right.
in some ways. And that's important because people have to be able to connect. It's tragedy. You know, how do you recover from tragedy? How do you move
Right.
on? And so that's what I wanted in that.
Well, you definitely succeeded, and it's very original. I mean, I've never heard of another story like this. You know, like I compared it to film noir before. Those are elements of ironic twists, but this
Right.
actual story is very, very unique. Let's ask the movie question. Have you envisioned it as a movie since we were talking about film noir?
Yes. Well, see, that's the other thing. I've been blessed enough when I started writing with or for Authors Tranquility. I met an agent through the process of my writing, and she first fell in love with Footsteps in the Dark.
Mm.
You know, and you and I have talked about Footsteps in the Dark,
Yeah.
and how much the responses I got from Footsteps in the Dark from everybody, yourself included, was to make a great movie. This would
Yeah.
make so she's been out representing Footsteps, and she's also out representing for film Deceitful Intentions
Mm.
and Sam Razor, the blonde with the bad nose job. So she's out rep. So hopefully something will come of that, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of who we're talking to. But, you know, that's an interesting question when I think about it. One of the things that I've realized as an author is I always want to write interesting books. I'm a
Hmm.
storyteller. You
Yeah.
know, when people think of themselves, authors to me are storytellers, and I love to tell stories, and I love have my stories be the kinds of stories that make you think,
Hmm.
make you question, give you surprise. And so with Footsteps, that was kind of the idea with the 8 stories, is to be surprising.
Mm.
And with Deceitful, it's the same way. So, but I write them with an eye for what would be really make good visual
Yeah.
stories on film or on television, because you know writing is not, it's not a visual element. It's more of a reading element, even though it brings
Hmm.
things to mind. But film is all about the visual. So it's kind of just making sure I kind of look at it that way,
Yeah.
because I don't know how many books you could ever really sell, you know, maybe in the millions if you got lucky, but it's finding an audience. That's the toughest thing for authors, as far as I'm concerned, is finding an audience. You know, finding somebody that's willing to take a risk and read your book and
Yeah.
then do you a favor and review it.
Right.
That's the other thing. You know, I'm always interested. And I tell people, whether you liked it or you didn't, I want to hear about it,
Right.
because that helps me the next time I get ready to write something. So that's always a challenge, is finding that audience.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the setting of the story. How important is that in this book?
Well, I mean, I think it's important because that was the genesis of where the whole thing started, the mystery started and everything else. It could have been any city in the United States. I mean, as
Hmm.
far as I was concerned, in my mind. I put it in the Midwest because I grew up in the Midwest, and I think sometimes that there's a little bit of a different attitude in the Midwest than some
Hmm.
places. I always felt as I was growing up in Chicago that people were very friendly. They were, for the most part, outgoing. And so I wanted it to be kind of a Midwestern story because that's kind of what I thought about Raven when I wrote it, is she was kind of that Midwestern girl, that kind of, she really appreciates things. She didn't take things for granted. You could see that in her character. So having it take place in the Midwest but that was almost incidental for me. It was almost, it could have been Florida. It could have
Right,
been, Vegas. It could have been any place because the crux of the story took place when you were there. It
right,
didn't have anything to do with it being there. It took place because it was there. So it was, uh, it was kind of by accident to some degree,
right.
because I really don't talk about the location that much in the book.
Hmm.
In other words, I don't go into big, into
Big
kind of
descriptive details of it. Yeah.
right. I mean, I'll describe the house she grew up in and the neighbors and the people. This more of a character book
Mm.
than it is anything else, and a mystery book, that kind of a thing. So uh, I put it there. That location was there simply because it kind of worked for me because I didn't want her to be in the same location where the accident happened because she's in the hospital and she has to move someplace. And I wanted to force her to have to go someplace because that was really going to have to make her confront the accident and be
Mm.
able to confront her getting better, that kind of a thing. So that was kind of the deal behind that.
Have you thought about working on an audiobook of this? I mean, you got such a great voice, a great speaking voice. I think you'd be a terrific narrator on your book as well.
You know what? That's interesting that you said that because I've been thinking about that. And in
Hmm.
fact, I was online the other day and I was looking at somebody's out there. They're doing a lot of AI audiobooks now.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. And the only reason that that's interesting is because you can do the narration yourself, but it's so much less expensive
Hmm.
than having to do, other kinds of audiobooks. So yeah, I have thought about it. I
Yeah.
especially thought about it for Sam Razor
Right.
because, that's his character for me is, I mean, he's a personal character for me. And
Right.
so being able to tell his story myself would be kind of fun. But yeah, I have thought about it.
That'd be awesome. Turning back to this book, what do you hope readers take away from the themes of resilience and justice in it?
Well, again, I hope that they take away the fact that, like I said, things happen. It's one of those things where if you sit back and you really think about life in general, you're not always in control of everything that goes on, and you're not always able to stop certain things, but you do have a choice in terms of how you react to it.
Hmm.
I wanted everybody to recognize in this book that she had a choice. She had a choice, and I want to have a choice for the things that happen to me in my life, and to recognize that I don't control everything, but I certainly control the reaction I have to things, and that's especially true with writing because I can write a book. I can write a lot of them. I'm now on my fifth book, and you can sit back and you can really want everybody to read it and love it and everything else, but you don't control that. You can just tell the story. And hopefully the stories are all unique enough in their own right, where it gives people the understanding of that, well, I've tried this one. It's really, really interesting. I'll try this one,
Yeah.
and see how interesting it is. And every one of them has that. Uh, I always wanted to write stories that have that ending that's either a twist ending that makes
Hmm.
you think or is an ending that kind of gives you inspiration. And this was one of those inspirational endings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk about your work as a writer. Do you have another book that's up here or already on the PC that you're working on?
Well, Evil Eyes just came out. I
Okay.
mean, I just put it out. It actually is on Amazon for the first time this week. And Evil Eyes was an interesting journey because it started as a screenplay years and years and years ago, this story. And I was writing a screenplay that was horror. I was trying to write a horror screenplay. And what I didn't realize is how how difficult it is to write screenplays
Mm,
because there's not only format and everything else, but then you got to see how you got to break it into acts. It's got to be act.
mhm,
So I wrote it and I gave it to somebody. But then what happened is I was looking for my next project and I went back and looked at the screenplay again for Evil Eyes. And I said, wait a minute, it's not a screenplay yet, but it will make a great story. So I wrote it into the book and it's called Evil Eyes.
mhm.
And it's about love, hate, and witchcraft.
Oh,
And the character in this is a female, and
mhm.
she's a trip. She's evil, very evil. But there's a whole subplot to it as to why she gets involved with the lead male character in the story and how that affects him. And so it's out now.
Great,
Uh,
great. So that sounds like a great book, and that's in the horror genre, you'd say.
that's in the horror genre. Over
Yeah,
horror, yes. And then I'm writing another case for Sam Razor. It's called the Backcourt Blackmailer. It's about a professional basketball team. He gets called in by the owner of the basketball team. He's being he wants Sam to come in and solve uh, a situation that he's going through. I'm writing that, and I'm also writing another Footsteps in the Dark. I've got another 7 stories that I'm working on right now for
great.
Footsteps in the Dark 2. But I've got all kinds of ideas. It's just and I don't go by which ones I think are the absolute best for the audience. I go by which ones are interesting me for the
Right.
most.
Well, I think if it's interesting to you, there's other yous out there. You know what I mean? So if it's something
Yes,
you're really interested, something you're really invested in, I think that'll actually bring out your best work as opposed to saying, well, what's on the bestseller list right now? Okay, books about New England. Let's write a story in New England, whatever it is. So I do think following your own passion is a great idea. Glad to see another Footsteps in the Dark is coming out. And for the folks at home who don't know it, this is a collection of stories almost along the lines of like a little Twilight Zone-ish type of
yes,
thing. Tell the folks
yes.
a little bit more about that. We'll go through all your anthology here.
So Footsteps, again, Footsteps started out with, in my mind, as being short stories.
Mhm.
I wanted to have shorts, and I wanted it to be good versus evil. Because in the world, whether we want to agree to it or not agree to it or admit it, there's a lot of evil,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of good. And I wanted it to tell the story of the fact that each of these short stories told the tale of someone who was evil, was trying to take advantage, and what happens to you when you do, that there
Mhm.
is an end result. And so, in my mind, I'll watch the news all the time. When somebody does something really weird or really evil, I'm always cheering for the result that they're going to get their payback, that they don't just get away with it,
Right.
even though there are a lot of people that get away with it. But I
Yeah.
didn't want that to be the case. So these short stories, this compilation was 8 short stories. They're not all horror and they're not all supernatural, but they're all good versus evil. And the
Mhm.
reasons people do things. For instance, one character in the book is an aging actress and
Mhm.
she's growing old. She doesn't want to grow old because what's happening, she's losing parts to all these young actresses that are coming up. So she's trying to figure out what she's going to do. She doesn't really realize it. And so she starts to really investigate what can help her. And she finds she's going on location in Africa and she goes through this, I guess what you'd call it is a shop. And in this shop, she meets this old woman who tells her, "I know who you are. I know your movie career and who you are, and I know what your problem is and what your challenge is." And so she doesn't. The woman says, "You're afraid of growing old, and I've got just what you need to keep you from growing old." And she gives her a potion. That's the name of the story. It's called The Potion. But she also gives her the caveat that if you take this potion, there are ramifications if you don't take it right. You can
Mhm.
only take one drop, you can only do it here, you can only do that. And if you do, then you'll stay young forever. Well, of course, this is what Mona needs to hear. She's going to be young forever with this potion. But the fact of the matter remains, as we all do, once she gets the result and it works, she decides that the little that she's taking will only be better if I take more and more. And the warning she gets from the old woman is if you take too much, it'll stop working. And you have to take this for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you will become a decrepit old woman. And so what ends up happening, that's what happens.
Yeah.
She takes it. she's so, and she, her, of course, she gets beautiful and her career takes off, but she doesn't stop taking it. And she ends up being in a situation where she has to take it, but she runs out of the potion. She doesn't know what to do. She's almost out of the potion. And so she goes back to Africa to try to find this old woman, and the old woman's not there anymore. So she can't find her. And now she can't fall in love with anybody because she can't divulge the fact that she's really on this drug, and
Mhm.
that if she runs out of this drug, she'll be a decrepit old woman. But she ends up meeting an actor who she wants to have a relationship with. And as it turns out at the end of this story, she finds out that she's out of the potion. She's going to turn into this old woman, but the man she's in love with, the other actor, he's also on the potion, and he's just enough for the two of them. And
Amazing.
that's how it
That's
is.
such a great ironic twist at the end as well. Black Mirror, here are some
Yeah.
scripts that are ready to go. Great
Yes.
stuff. I'm glad you broke out that story and reminded us of it once again because it's absolutely terrific. You can almost picture an old Gloria Swanson playing the
Yes.
role and maybe
Yes.
a younger version of her playing her younger self.
Yes.
We've got a few more minutes. Let's talk a little bit about one of your favorites, one of my favorites, because I love film noir and private detectives and all that. Sam Razor, blonde with the bad nose job. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Sam Razor. So I want to say years ago, I fell in love with the name Sam Razor. And so
Mhm.
much of that had to do with, the other major detectives that were out there. They all had Sam Spade and all these. He had to have kind of a name that, was
Philip
reminiscent of.
Marlowe, Sam
Yeah,
Spade.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yep.
So I came up with the name Sam Razor, and I love the name. And I
Yeah.
said, well, come on, I wanted to write kind of this comedy mystery. Well,
Mhm.
not just mystery, but comedy mystery. And I wanted this character to be that kind of comedic uh, detective. He's
Mhm.
very competent, but he's also quirky. I wanted
Right.
him to be quirky so that people could remember him for what he was. And then I said, okay, well, now what I need a case that he can go off on. And for me, it was all about the title of the case.
Mhm.
So I said, what title can I give this thing that people will remember? And that's where I came up with the blonde with the bad nose job.
It's
And then
great.
developed the story around the title, basically for Sam. And that's where it all started. And then I went on to write the case. And it got Sam Razor got a lot of good feedback. A lot of people read it, thought it was funny. Everybody likes the title. I mean, if you don't,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
hard to get by the title. I think how it works.
And me spending time in LA and you spending time in Vegas, we've seen a lot of blondes with bad nose jobs in our time. That's for
That's
sure.
exactly
Now
right.
we've got another Sam Razor mystery coming out. You teased it
Yeah.
a little bit. You're working on that, right?
Yes, it's called it's about a guy who owns a professional basketball team in LA,
That's right.
and he's being blackmailed by somebody in his organization, and he has to figure out who it is. And they're in the playoffs. This team won the championship the year before, and they're back in the playoffs again this year. And the blackmailer, don't know who it is. They want $50 million. Otherwise, they're going to go public with the fact that his star player, who's the reason that he's in the playoffs, has been taking drugs, and who's then using and in order to pay off the drugs that he's buying, he has to throw games. And
Hmm.
so they're saying, look, if you don't give me the 50 million, I'm going public with the fact that you're star player, which he realizes that if that happens, then they'll have to get the guy off the court while they do a whole analysis of whether it's true. And it's a comedy mystery. I like the fact I love basketball, especially this time
Hmm.
of the year with the playoffs. I
Yeah.
love basketball, and this is kind of one of those. So it's got a lot of characters in it, a lot of good characters. Um, it's always interesting because I always start with titles.
Hmm.
I always come up with tricky titles and then try to build Sam into it once I come
Right.
up. And the backcourt blackmailer kind of worked for me when I was thinking about it.
Awesome. Awesome. It sounds great. I love the fact that the books are not only thrilling, but they're also quirky and funny too. I think it's a winning combination because people really want to be entertained when they're reading. Yes, they can get caught up in the story and what's next or who's this going to be and that kind of stuff, but making it funny and making them laugh from time to
Right.
time really seals the deal for me. The name of this book is Deceitful Intentions, a Revenge Mystery by Carlo Armenise. After a tragic car accident that was no accident at all, Raven Redman returns home with a new prosthesis and lost memories, only to uncover Dark Truths. It is a great read. You will love it. Some laughs in there as well. Lots of twists, lots of irony, and very memorable characters written by our very prolific guest, Carlo Armenise. Carlo, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me again, and I really appreciate you and your viewers and everything you're doing. It's my pleasure to be part of it.
I appreciate it. Love having you on the show. Look forward to talking to you again about the next books. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.